So what I'm going to do is just run through in 10 minutes or so a little bit about what we're seeing from the industry in terms of 5G and network analytics. And the first thing just to briefly touch upon and point out is sort of why are we talking about this today? Why is this such a timely topic area to be discussing? And I think that we can look at this both from the short-term priorities we're seeing from operators at the moment, as well as from some larger, more macro trends within the industry. So the chart I'm showing at the moment is focused a little bit more on the short term. So how have we seen operators' priorities change during the COVID-19 pandemic? And we at STL did a large survey back in May, to ask operators about how things had shifted and what was changing because of the pandemic. And what you can see here is in terms of technology domains that operators were evaluating and looking to pursue, automation clearly came out as that one technology domain where the majority of respondents replied that they were going to accelerate their efforts around automation due to some of the outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can see there in the red and the orange, the bars showing that the majority were seeing that as something that needed to be pursued more rapidly because of COVID-19. You can also see that operators were in general looking to accelerate their efforts around AI and analytics as well. So on the short term, we've heard from operators that this is a priority for them. This is something that COVID-19 has demonstrated the importance of it to their operating model. But we also know that there are some big macro trends within the industry that are fueling interest as well. So 5G rollout continues and picking up pace. And more importantly, perhaps we're seeing some evidence from the early movers of the impact of 5G rollout, which is probably fueling others in the industry. We're seeing continued evidence of impact of AI and analytics across 4G and legacy networks, again, bringing this topic to the fore. We're seeing interesting announcements and trends around the increasing cloudification of networks, including some interesting announcements from specific operators like Dish around their use of public cloud in order to do this. And we're seeing, real acceleration of efforts around Open RAN as well, and kind of virtualization across the spectrum from access to core for operators. So I think both on the short term and the macro industry trends, we're seeing real kind of acceleration of efforts around AI and automation. And I don't want to labor this point, but we at STL, and I think it's close to some of the thinking that Guavas had, just want to bear in mind that with a 4G world, AI and automation and running your networks was primarily an overlay function for the network itself. And we liken this to a sort of a jumbo jet where you use automation and data analytics in order to help support you, but ultimately it is the pilot who's in charge of landing the plane. In comparison, when we think about 5G, we think this is much closer to a fighter jet analogy. And in a fighter jet, it's actually impossible for a human to fly a fighter jet themselves. The controls are too fine-tuned, and a human would really struggle. So that is, entirely reliant upon automation in order to function. And it cannot be an overlay. It must be something that's baked into the systems that work. And that's the kind of shift that I think we're expecting to see as we think and talk about automation in a 5G world rather than a 4G one. So it's exciting, but it doesn't come without its challenges. And we've been speaking to operators a lot about what this brings in terms of cultural and technological challenges. And the thing that we've learned from operators is that the technology is difficult and they are trying to grapple with how they can implement use cases, particularly within the networks, which are highly difficult from a data perspective, highly difficult from an implementation perspective, highly difficult from a scale perspective. But what operators primarily told us is that the technology is a challenge, yes, but it's a challenge that they can see a route to solving. It's something where they think they have some of the skills and the abilities to work with their partners in order to solve some of those hurdles around the technology. What we did hear instead, though, where we heard that operators were much less clear about their route to solving the problem, was when we were talking to them about recruiting and training the people that are needed in order to run AI analytics at that cloud scale. And here, there's, I think, a lot less clarity within the industry around how operators are going to recruit those people that they need, hold on to them once they've been recruited, and ensure that they're recruiting people that can also bring that kind of telco expertise as well as some of the data analytics and AI expertise that they need. So it's worth bearing in mind that the most operators are trying to handle both or challenges that fall into both of these buckets, but perhaps some of that cultural and people side of things being more difficult for them than the technology too. And I don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but maybe just to touch upon two challenges that I've heard from operators, one that's focused a little bit more on the culture and the people side of things, and one which is a little bit more technology focused, and is what I'll do in the final kind of few minutes of my opening presentation. So on the people side of things, a question that we've been asked quite a lot, and I think many within the industry are trying to handle, is how do I ensure that if I get to a point of closed loop within my network, often seen as sort of the nirvana for operators, how do I make sure that my team, that my network engineers trust this system and trust the recommendations that are coming out of it? That's the first question and challenge. The second one is a little bit more on the technology side, and it's how do I handle AI and automation when I'm thinking about networks in a different way, when I'm thinking about running them perhaps as a best in breed effort, where I'm not primarily working with just one or two vendors, but instead I'm bringing a lot more parties to the table that need to integrate with each other in order to enable me to run my network successfully. Those are the two questions, two challenges that operators have put to us recently. And to start with that first one, how do I ensure my team has trust in closed loop systems? I think what we say is that there has to be checkpoints, checks and balances at every point in the kind of the closed loop system. And this probably needs to be implemented on a sort of a step-by-step basis. So if we walk through briefly what happens within kind of implementing a self-healing network, we're going to start off with some real-time network telemetry data. And in a self-healing, or a self-optimizing network, the goal is to feed that data into a recommendation engine. That recommendation engine will go through a policy engine that may be powered by machine learning, which can help to identify potential issues, recommend the next best action based on the policies and the playbooks that have set by the network operator. And that can then deliver those actionable insights, which are ideally also implemented in an automated fashion, so without human involvement. If you do all of this in real time, then you start to get something which looks like the self-healing network that everyone is talking about. Complementing this, alongside this, there's also the outcomes or the event-based data and a whole host of other data on network ops, which is being fed back into a centralized data lake. And this can be analyzed retrospectively to develop better insights on how to improve the management of network functions, with the aim of updating those policy engines to meet the change in usage patterns or the change of needs within the network. What we think, in order to make sure that you have trust in this system, is that at each point along the way, there has to be a transparency and an explainability to your existing network team. So they have to be able to understand why the recommendation engine recommends what it does, particularly if that's different to what they may have done in their day-to-day practices before. They have to understand how the policy engine ensures that policies are met. They have to understand why an action or an insight has been suggested before it's implemented in the network. And they have to have faith that the policy engine is being successfully updated at the end of it. So we think that's kind of the key way to pull apart how you can start to build trust in a self-healing network, is to ensure that at each of these steps, where needed, there is the transparency and the explainability to be able to communicate back to networking teams about what it is that's taken place and why. The other side of things is to think a little bit more about the technology. As I said, the other key sort of area that I pulled out that I was hearing from operators was a challenge or an industry question around 5G and AI and automation, is around how you handle a new best-in-breed environment. We're hearing a lot of excitement around Open RAN and around other efforts to open up the network to new DIY best of breed vendors. But this does not come without its challenges. And within Open RAN, we've seen architectures which look a little bit like the one on the left, where you have one vendor running the kind of the kit at the base station and the other running the virtual baseband unit. And we're also seeing other architectures where we're actually seeing a centralization of CUs or a pooling of CUs with different vendors running various parts of that. And the major challenge around all of this is probably around standardization. And this, of course, becomes particularly important where you no longer have networks dominated by kits from one or two main nets. And what I'm showing here is the different architectures that Open RAN, could offer for operators. I think there's two main things just to think about before I hand back to Stephen. The first is, it isn't yet clear just how flexible and DIY operators are likely to go. There will be some, probably those that are the real early mover Open RAN converts, some of the big tier ones, who want to exercise true flexibility within their vendors. But there will be many, I think, who will start to follow a few blueprints that are set out by the industry, where there sort of is evidence of a successful deployment, and they'll follow that. So we talk about this world of open interfaces, truly best of breed scenarios, but I think it is worth reflecting back on just how much we expect most operators to go down that route. But the other key point that I wanted to just talk about a little bit was around standardization and interoperability, and how it's sort of key to making any of this work. And when I say making this work, that means more than just standing up the network, rolling out 5G. It's about the ongoing management and performance of the network, and those day two operations. And without one neck to choke or one line of clear responsibility to a primary vendor or one or two primary vendors, telcos need that reassurance that this really is a scalable and high performance solution. And I think one of the ways that they may look to kind of get that reassurance is by understanding how some sort of standardization on the analytics side and on the interface side to deliver for them what they think can be achieved with Open RAN and other best of breed efforts within the network.